Today I want to share with you 3 unfair advantages in marketing your private investigator business. Hi, this is Larry Kaye with ShadowAnyone.com and the creator of the Investigator's Ultimate Guide series, which is premium private investigator training from someone who's been there and done that. 3 unfair advantages to give you more business as a private investigator. Number 1, I think before we even get into that list, let me tell you, you have to offer your client something they want and they're willing to pay for. The temptation is to create something unique or fun or clever for getting clients, but only to find out that that's not anything that they're even vaguely interested in at all. It's pointless to differentiate yourself if the client doesn't have any particular interest in that difference. And now I'm not talking about branding here. Sure, you may have a certain difference based on the way you look or the way your website is built or your social media, that type of thing. People have to know, like, and trust you, and you can differentiate yourself that way. But now we're talking about purely business and getting an advantage over your competition. The first unfair advantage is offering your potential clients something your competition hasn't yet thought to offer them. And so I think a good example here would be when you're marketing to say things like, with my services, you get a free written report. There's no extra charge for video, those types of things. And you can get a follow-up summary within 24 hours via phone, or we'll communicate with you by text message. These are things that maybe your competition does. A lot of detective agencies do this. In some places, in my state, you're required to give a written report if the client wants it. But if your competition is not pointing that out, then this can give you an unfair advantage when a potential client is shopping around, looking around, and they say, well, gee, you're going to do all the same things this guy does. The other agency lists all the things they do, surveillance and background checks and all that type of thing. It's just a list of services. When they come to you, they find, yes, you offer the exact same services, but you include a free written report. There's no extra cost for the video. You can give them text message updates. Those types of things are things your competition has not thought to offer. Of course, the weak part of this competitive advantage is your competition can quickly figure that out and offer it as well. So it's not something that's going to keep you ahead for in the long term, but it is an unfair advantage you can have in the meantime. The second unfair advantage you can have over your competition is to offer something they're not willing to offer. So one example of this is you might offer to run license plates when your competition is not willing to do that. Now, as a professional, you understand there's all sorts of restrictions on this. You can't just do this for anyone at any time for no reason at all. But your competition may be reluctant to do it, and you're offering to do it. So when the client calls you, you can pre-screen them, see if this is a legitimate reason, see if it falls under your state's exemptions where you can do this for them, and you can offer them a service that the other guy is not willing to offer. Another thing might be process serving. So, for example, you're not afraid or unwilling to go out and take the court papers out to people when the time comes. Maybe your competition is unwilling to do process serving. So now, boom, again, you've got your foot in the door. Not that they can't offer that service, but they're unwilling to. Maybe the fact that you'll do interviews, in-person interviews, or accident investigations when the other companies are not willing to do that. So this is your second unfair advantage, offering a service they're not willing to offer. The downside to that is, of course, they can decide, yes, I am willing to offer that. I've shared this with you before. When I started out, got my license, opened my agency, for the first 3 months, I did not take any domestic cases. I did not want to mess around with these infidelities and all that kind of thing. And for 3 months, I just passed those on to other investigators. Pretty quickly, I found out I kind of needed those to keep the money coming in and keep the doors open, especially initially when I didn't have, I didn't offer process serving back then, so I really didn't have those law firms that I worked for. I hadn't built up human resources departments as clients for doing background checks and pre-employment screenings. So I needed to change my what I was not willing to offer and offer it. And I started taking those cases from my fellow investigators in the area. And it was a very quick and easy thing for me to do once I decided that, yes, I was going to offer it. So when you offer something that they're not willing to offer, be prepared. Eventually they can come around and say, you know what, I am going to offer process serving, or I am going to offer this other service, and then you've lost that competitive advantage. But in the meantime, you're one step ahead of them. The third and final unfair advantage I want to share with you that you can have over your competition is to offer something that they cannot offer. Now, this is a very clever thing to do, because what you can look at is you specifically, you as an individual. What do you have that's different or separates you from the competition? I'm not talking about your unique selling proposition. I have a whole nother video on that. That's vitally important that you figure out what your unique selling proposition is. And a USP is why someone should hire you as opposed to all the other options they have. When I talk about an unfair advantage on something the competition cannot offer, let's look very specifically. So maybe you come out of law enforcement. Specifically, maybe you're a former federal agent. You did that for 20 years or 30 years and you retired and you opened your own detective agency. That is not something that the competition can offer, and certainly it's not something they can replicate easily. Now, you and I know that just because you were a federal agent for 20 or 30 years doesn't necessarily make you a good private investigator. But when you're putting together your marketing package, when you're putting together the reason someone should hire you, look at that and emphasize that, because many people are impressed with that. So you're going to want to talk about the pros that you bring to the situation that the competition simply can't. Some things like that might include working carefully or closely with the prosecutor's office, federal prosecutors. It might deal with working interstate or interfederal agencies and having that network that other people supposedly don't have. But see how you can use that as an unfair advantage. Maybe you weren't a federal agent, maybe you were a street cop for 20, 30 years, 5 years, 6 years, 2 years, it doesn't matter. You can play up your former law enforcement experience and have that unfair advantage over other people in the industry. Now, does being a street cop make you a good private investigator? No. Does being a street cop, are the skill sets even the same? Pretty much no. There are some similarities. And that's not to be degrading to any street cop. My goodness, thank you for doing that for us. We need it desperately. But when you're marketing your services and you are talking about, look, I've been all over this town. I've been in parts of the neighborhoods that you wouldn't dare go into in broad noon. I've been there at midnight. Talk about your ability to go out into the community and get information. Talk about your local networks, your local connections that you've built up over the years. This is an unfair advantage that the next guy can't easily duplicate, maybe cannot at all. If you come out of the private sector, maybe working retail loss prevention as I did, emphasize the private sector, that you can do things because you have access and networks and experience that don't require restricted law enforcement tools. Look, if you're a former law enforcement, you may be really good at running someone through leads, or you may be able to really good at running license plates right sitting in the cruiser. You may be awesome at traffic stops, but that may not be what the client needs. So if you're coming out of private sector, emphasize to your clients that if they're looking at someone who might be former law enforcement, a lot of their tools are no longer valid for them. A lot of what they cut their teeth on and learned on, they don't even have access to anymore. But you, having come out of the private sector, working, say, loss prevention or organized retail crime, that type of thing, you've been in the private sector way longer than that guy, and you understand how to use private sector resources. You've built up the connections and the networks that allow you to succeed. See how you're kind of taking whatever is unique to you and difficult to replicate. If a person is calling around to the different detective agencies and they're talking to the guy who's got a federal investigative experience for 20 years, but they have talked to you and they're kind of like concerned, they say to him, how much experience do you have in the private sector? That's kind of where you're going to be working my case. He doesn't have much he can say there. Flip it around. If you are the former law enforcement and you've already told somebody, look, these are strong points and important things for you to consider, especially if, say, for example, working closely with the prosecutor's office or something like that, then when that person calls around to somebody who has no law enforcement experience, they're going to say, well, your experience working with a prosecutor, how many cases have you filed? How many arrests have you made? Now you can see none of these examples is one necessarily a better investigator than another. Just because you got your license doesn't make you good. Just because you're ex-law enforcement doesn't make you good. Just because you've been a private investigator for 20 years in the private sector doesn't make you good. There's all sorts of investigators out there that they're good at their little niche maybe, but they can't stretch out far beyond that. So as you can see, no matter where you are in investigative experience or where your agency is, look at what you've got going for you that's difficult for the competition to replicate, and that can be an unfair advantage, and that's an unfair advantage that can last you a long, long time. In the meantime, I remind you, no matter what you do or how you choose to market yourself, remember, do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing. You can offer that service, and as people are shopping around trying to find a solution to their problem and they see that you offer this, they're going to give you a call. Now you're going to pre-screen the client, make sure they're not a wackadoodle, and that's probably politically incorrect. So you're going to pre-screen the client, and obviously you're not going to take a case that you shouldn't take or run a plate just willy-nilly for anybody.